If I flip a fair coin and get heads 10 times in a row, what do you think the next flip will be? Most people will say, tails. Tails is you. Yeah, tails will come out. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The coin doesn't care. And believing that it does is called the gambler's fallacy. Today, we'll explain what the gambler's fallacy really is, why streaks feel meaningful, and how our previous lesson on the binomial distribution ties up with the idea that a streak does not change probability. What is the gambler's fallacy? The gambler's fallacy is the belief that if something happens a lot in the past, the opposite is more likely to happen next. Classic examples. After many blacks on roulette, red must be coming. Or after many heads, tails is due. Or after many losses, a win must be next. This belief is wrong when the process is independent, and coin tosses are the clearest example of independence. A fair coin toss is independent, meaning each toss has no memory of previous tosses. No matter what happened before, the probability of heads is 50%, and the probability of tails is 50%. Even after 5 heads in a row, even after 10 or 100 heads in a row, the probability of the next toss is still 50-50. Nothing changes. But where does the confusion come from? Why does the gambler's fallacy feel so convincing? It's because people confuse two very different questions. Question 1, the correct thinking. What is the probability of the next coin toss? Answer is 50%, and people know that. Question 2, and that's a different question. What is the probability of seeing many heads in a long sequence? That question does involve the binomial distribution. Plus, there's an additional complication that arises from the framing of that issue. And this is where the intuition breaks down. To illustrate, let's go back to our own example of 3 coin tosses in the last video and say it produced 3 heads. One will say with certainty that the probability of that happening is 1/8, or 3 combination 3 times 0.5 raised to the power 3. Now, because people frame the issue from this point of view, of the past 3 throws giving rise to a probability of 0.125 or 1/8, they think to themselves, hey, 3 heads in a row looks strange, and 1/8 probability? Well, that's too low. Shouldn't it be 50% or something? So maybe there must be some cosmic balance in the universe that will correct this. So it must be tails next time to produce the right statistics, or something to that effect. See how that all gets easily mixed up? The next toss is confused with past tosses as if they were related. And here we're still presuming a fair coin. And that is the first major issue. We forget the independence of the toss coin experiments using a fair coin. The next issue is a bit more subtle and harder to detect. What do you think is the other problem here? Just pause the video and think about it, and resume playing when you're ready. Okay, welcome back. Here's the problem. The subtle issue that gets buried in the framework. Why stick with 3 tosses? Yeah, 3 heads has a low probability of 0.125, but that's for 3 tosses. For 5 tosses, the probability of a 3-head streak is 1/4 or 0.25. For 7 tosses, the probability of a 3-head strike is even higher at 0.344. Clearly, when there are more tosses, the chances of a 3-head streak are not as low as you initially thought it was, since there are now more opportunities for a 3-head streak to happen with more tosses. In fact, for 10 tosses, the odds of a 3-head streak are actually slightly more than 50%, meaning it was even more likely to happen than not, contrary to our initial belief, simply because we limited ourselves to a universe of 3 tosses only. Do you see the problem now? You only think it is low because you're framing the 3-head streak from a 3-toss point of view. But that's faulty thinking. You just imagine it to be low because you heard 3 heads. So you limited yourself to 3 tosses. But with higher tosses, the 3-head streak is not at all unusual. That works as well with higher numbers. In the famous example of 1913 at the Monte Casino, the roulette ball landed on black around 10 times in a row, therefore attracting attention and bets from gamblers. But it kept on hitting black, attracting even more extravagant bets from gamblers, only to hit black even more. Gamblers, convinced that red was due, placed even more massive bets on it, losing millions as black continued for several more spins. It eventually hit 26 blacks in a row, an extraordinarily rare streak with odds said to be around 1 in 68 million. However, 26 results of black are extremely rare only when viewed from the limited toss framework that we had with our toss coin experiments. It must be remembered that these games are not limited toss experiments, and for roulette, these wheels are spun thousands of times a day, running in the millions in a year and through time. Yes, very long streak outcomes are still rare outliers, but with millions of runs, such an occurrence in a year is definitely still in the realm of the possible and not the improbable. And remember, it started to get attention when the streak was low enough, past single-digit streaks. At that point, people should have realized that streaks of 10 plus were very much possible and not impossibly low when viewed from the millions of spins of the roulette in a year. However, this should not blur the distinction already made previously that these have nothing to do with the next spin, which still does not depend on the previous outcomes. What the previous discussion alerts us to is that we think that these are low probabilities only due to our framing of the run in the immediate short term, rather than from the actual context of long-run experiments, from where the next few spins or tosses remain obviously independent of the past, while simultaneously contributing to the long-run build-up of the statistics. So the key mistake here is that the binomial distribution describes patterns across many tosses, not predictions for the next single toss. Imagine this. You walk into a room and see a coin on the table. You didn't see what happened before. Is the probability of heads still 50%? Well, of course it is. Now ask yourself, why should knowing the past suddenly give the coin memory? Well, it shouldn't. But people might say, but there have been 10 heads already since we arrived. And the probabilities of that happening are quite low, blah, 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 blah. Well, think to yourself, should this matter? Well, of course not. The next toss still has a probability of 50%. Nothing has changed, and the low probability that people are thinking about is not only faulty, it's also irrelevant. The next few tosses should be viewed from the larger long-term context if people really want to talk about the probability distributions. It's only there will it make sense why the tosses are independent and yet still tied to a probability distribution. Casinos rely on this misunderstanding. People increase bets after losses, think a win is due, and they chase streaks. But the house knows that each game is independent, expected value doesn't change, and long-run averages favor the house. This fallacy turns randomness into false hope. And in the future, we'll talk about topics of capital adequacy to bring home this point. Let's summarize. A fair coin has no memory. Streaks are normal in random processes and should be viewed from the long-run context, not from the immediate short run of the streak. The binomial distribution explains long-run behavior. It does not change next trial probabilities, and believing otherwise is the gambler's fallacy. Randomness doesn't self-correct on demand. So, the next time you see a long streak, remember, the coin doesn't owe you anything, and there's no reason for the next toss to depend on previous tosses if it's a fair coin. If you enjoyed this episode, kindly like, subscribe to help support the channel. Thanks, and see you next time.